Well, Chuck, thanks for joining today.
Thanks
First
for having me.
question, yeah, thank you. The first question is where did you grow up?
I grew up out in McCook, Nebraska, and so far as I know, there may have been occasions from out there before, but I don't believe there were any when I came down and joined the chapter.
So in McCook, what was your childhood like?
Oh, McCook was a great place to grow up. I was pretty active in things in high school, in band and in debate and on the golf team, and was a pretty good student, so I had some scholarship money to go to school with, and my stuff with speech and debate had, I'd had some acquaintance with the university because we'd had speech tournaments down there, and so it was a fine place, and a couple of my friends eventually came down and also joined Acacia, so.
Why did you decide to go to University of Nebraska-Lincoln?
Well, at the time, I was pretty certain I was going to either become a musician or a law school lawyer, and they had a good law school and they had a good music program. I didn't end up doing any of those things, but that's what it just seemed the natural choice at the time, and that's where I've gotten scholarships to go. So that sort of told our story because I was going to have to work even with the scholarships, and that reduced the workload quite a bit, at least the first year. So right about that era, most of the kids who went on to college went down to Lincoln. There were a couple went to Kearney and a couple elsewhere, but Lincoln was pretty much the school of choice.
After you arrived at UNL, how did you go about and deciding to join Acacia? What was that story like for you?
There was a rush week in those days, just as the fall semester was about to get underway, and I went through the rush week and was pretty impressed with two or three houses, and they were the ones I got invited back to, and then I got a couple of free bids, but by that time the people who had impressed me most were particularly the upperclassmen in the house at that time. And that's why I chose it amongst the bids I had. So I was never unhappy about that.
Where was the house located when you first went to Rush Week?
It was right on the corner of 17th and R, and it was an old rambling frame house, 3 stories. And then eventually, while I was there, they also bought a house a block away that they called the Annex to handle the overflow. So if you were a freshman, you moved into the house itself, but as you got to be an upperclassman, you could move into the Annex down the block. None of the facilities were really very good, and while I wasn't part of building the new place, we were overjoyed when we heard they were going to get a new house.
You like you said, you were impressed by some of the upperclassmen. From your time from '61 until when you graduated, what were some of your favorite stories of Acacia?
Well, there were several, things that just stand out. It was very apparent early on that we had a chapter advisor in Keith Sawyer who was just the envy of the campus. People really looked up to him, and he was a great advisor, and he could be, he could give some pretty solid and serious direction from time to time. But by and large, he was very casual about things, and he came down and ate with us, and he was friends, and we went out to his place, and he was just a great companion and someone you looked up to and you wanted to emulate in ways. And the other part of that story is we had a house mother, Mother Armour, who was a delightful woman and an expert bridge player. So if you were into bridge at all, and I was a sort of duffer at bridge, but I enjoyed it. It was great because on weekend nights, if you weren't out dating or something, you were sitting in there and having bridge tournaments with your house mother, and they were just a gas to do because she was a delightful woman.
So you got
I was also lucky. I had a pledge father named Mike Flanagan, and he was about as far to the right in politics as you could get, and he thought he could convert me and took me to all sorts of events that took place in town that had any kind of a right-wing political slant. And then when I joined the House, I met my first I met guys that became Democrats, but I never knew anybody that grew up a Democrat except my best friend at home and Rich Older King. So, so what was interesting is there were tremendous discussions around the house between some of those guys, and I'd never been exposed to that. I thought everybody believed exactly what my parents believed, and it was interesting to get down there and hear people really exchange ideas about politics and economics and culture and movies, and that was one of the great parts of it, was just the conversations at meal times and then the things you talk about out on dates or out on the town.
So you were saying your pledge father was Flanagan?
Yeah, Mike Flanagan.
Mike, yeah, and Mike, it looks Mike became a lawyer, I believe.
Yeah, yes, he did. Yes. Mm-hmm. He was a great guy, and he had a wonderful leather satchel, a suitcase of sorts, and I had admired it so often. And when he graduated, he said it was sort of like that old commercial with Mean Joe Green and the handing the kids the jersey. He said, "Here, kid," and he gave me his leather. I carried it for years.
That's great. That's great. Like I said, I think he lives in Minnesota, and he's an avid. I want to call him an avid boater. I think he's still out on the water and gets out every now and then. So that's great that you still remember Mike.
Oh, you bet. I remember a lot of them. We had a fellow from Madrid, Nebraska, who had intended to play football and had lost a couple of fingers the summer before he was to go to school, which also wrecked the idea of him becoming a piano major. And Dewey Weens was his name, and he had one of the best attitudes of anybody I know. He dated a beautiful girl, and he was just about as good to me as anybody in any fraternity could have ever been to a lowly pledge. There were just a lot of guys like that. I never roomed with him, but I really liked him. And I liked his best friend, who was a crack rifle shooter on the ROTC rifle team, a kid named Mark Cox from up near Mullen, Nebraska. And I had not known many people from out in that western and Sandhills area, and there were several of them in the house, and I enjoyed them a lot.
Yeah, I believe Marvin still lives out in Mullen, and yes, to this day. So that's terrific. That you remember those guys from that era. So they were pledge class of '59. So yeah, they were just 2 years older than you at that point in time. So they were those upperclassmen that influenced you, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, they as much as anything were why I joined the house. I really enjoyed them when I went through Rush Week and enjoyed them after I joined and enjoyed them while I was a pledge and then when I became an active. I never got to room with any of those guys. I roomed with a wonderful guy who was who'd been a paratrooper and was back in school after serving in the military, named Swede Rader. And we would roughhouse up in the room. We'd wrestle until Swede had about enough of it, and then he'd get you between those paratroopers' legs and start to squeeze, and then that was sort of that was the end of the fight.
Yeah, the Swede. So Swede's name, I think his first name was Roland, right?
Yes, Roland. Yeah.
He's I think I talked to his wife, very sweet lady. That's great. I didn't know his nickname though. That's terrific. That is Swede, the paratrooper with the iron legs.
With the iron legs, I'm telling you, I've never known legs as strong as that. And he had an ability I've never known in anybody else in my life. He never smoked until finals week, and he would go buy a pack of cigarettes and he'd smoke during finals week, and when finals week was over, he'd put them away and he'd never smoke again until the next finals week.
So he could quit at any given time, and then
he could absolutely. It was amazing because I have an addictive personality, and I didn't understand that kind of behavior a bit.
It's amazing. A lot of discipline for sure. Wow. During your Acacia time there, did you end up graduating, and what happened after you graduated UNL?
I graduated in '64 with my bachelor's degree, and I stayed on and took a master's in philosophy, and then I got to switch over, and I stayed on and got a Ph.D. in English there, all at UNL. So I followed the fraternity for some time because I was right on campus, and the young man who was my to-be wife's brother joined the fraternity, named Barclay Wrestler. And so I knew his group of people, Frosty Critchfield and him and a number of people from that era. And then I'd had friends that had joined while I was in the house, and my dad was at the time the Episcopal chaplain at St. Mark's on the campus over by Love Library. And that's where I went to church, and several buddies began going with me, and two other of my fraternity brothers ended up being ordained into the Episcopal Church. So some of those contacts went on, still go on.
Right. I think, is it Rodney Moore?
Rod Moore, you bet, and Wayne Carlson, who died last year. But Rod and I are still in close touch.
That's terrific to have both of you in the same pledge class. I think Rodney's only 2 numbers below you, and both become Episcopal priests. So, and I think he's in Colorado now, right? Aurora?
He's in Aurora, right.
Wow. Yeah.
Right.
What are the odds? That's terrific. So you graduated, eventually stayed on through your Ph.D., became Episcopal priest, and then did you go back come out of Lincoln and go back to your hometown and preach there?
Well, eventually in Kearney, but no, right after I got my degree, I went off to teach at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, and I took care of a church, a little mission church up by the Grand Canyon while I was out there. And then we came back to Nebraska when I was asked to be the rector of the Episcopal Church in Kearney.
Okay, great. So, and how long have you been in Kearney now?
Since we moved back here in '77, we've been here the entire time, except we lived in Grand Island for 4 years, just a few years ago. Mm-hmm. I had retired at the university here and saw that parish, that Episcopal church in Grand Island, had a vacancy, and I wrote and said, I think you'd be out of your minds to consider someone over age and grade, but I would love to come serve. And they needed someone for a short-term ministry, 4 years, while they got ready for someone new, and that filled my bill, so it was great. But outside of that, we've been in Kearney.
So in Flagstaff, you left Flagstaff and to come back home to Kearney. What was the impetus for that? What was the main driver to leave Flagstaff, leave the sunny, arid desert of Arizona, I guess?
Well, we loved Flagstaff and would have probably never left, except my parents. I'm an only child, and my parents were getting older, and it was difficult to manage from a distance. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to somehow get back closer to where they were, and they were living in Grand Island. So that was part of the impetus to come back to the state, and I'm not unhappy we did that, but we might not have done it otherwise.
Yeah, well, you were the good child, and take care of your parents. That's very admirable. So that's
my dad was an honorary member of the chapter.
Really?
He had been rushed when he was a student at KU. He'd been rushed by Acacia, but he couldn't afford it at the time. And by the time he was on campus at the Episcopal chapel there, the guys invited him to come over and become an honorary member. By the time he was then the chaplain at NU, the guys invited him to come down and become an honorary.
Oh, that's terrific. And that was, what was his first name?
George.
Okay,
H. Peak. Mm-hmm.
And he was roll number 634, and he was initiated just a couple of years after you as an honorary in October 16th, 1965.
That's right. And the impulse for that really didn't even come from me. It came, my best friend from McCook, Steve Snyder, had joined the chapter. Mm-hmm. And he had been the one, I think, who proposed that to the fellows. He had known the story about my dad because he'd grown up out there around him, and he proposed that, and they did it. I was very pleased with that.
And I think Steve still lives in Nevada. And
lives in Henderson, Nevada.
Henderson.
Right.
Yeah, that's terrific.
He's a sort of I don't know what to say. He's sort of a real estate mogul in Las Vegas.
Great. Well, we'll have to get in touch with him too and see what's new with Steve. Wow. What advice would you like to pass down to other vacations?
I don't know that I'm anyone to give advice, but I can tell you this. I found it was very possible to learn a lot, both in class but also in conversations with other people. To learn a lot, and I had to work most of the time I was there, to work a lot and still to play a lot and to have a good time. And, your college years are the only years of your life where you're going to have the opportunity to do all those at the same time. And, I just would say take advantage of it. Do your schoolwork and have fun at the house and with your friends and get out and realize that you're in the process of making something of yourself. If you can do all those things at once, you're going to look back and be happy with your college years.
From growing up all the way coming through UNL and in your church life, what do you think you're most proud of?
Oh golly, that'd be pretty hard. I think what I'm most proud of, and it's probably just because of the year you happened to get in touch with me. My wife and I are celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary this summer, and wow. I don't think there was probably anything in my background, and certainly not my years in the fraternity, that taught me how to be married for 50 years. But we managed it somehow. And so,
congratulations.
I'd say I'm proudest of that because it was counterintuitive.
I want to thank you for taking the time to speak to the fraternity today and share your story. Thanks, Chuck.
Hey, I want to thank you for getting in touch with me. It's been enjoyable getting to know you a little bit, and I really appreciate your being able to accommodate a change of time in this.
Anytime.